watching Our Time on Freedom. I'm Mikhail Baranov. Hello. Next, we'll talk about the important events of Wednesday. Last night, 99 drones of various types were launched. The Russian army targeted Ukraine. This was reported by the Ukrainian Air Force. Ukrainian air defense neutralized 90 of the drones. Strikes were recorded at 6 locations, and at 3 more, debris from downed UAVs fell. 4 people were killed and 23 were injured as a result of the Russian army's attack on the Donetsk region. This was reported by the head of the local military administration, Vadim Falashkin. More than 12 apartment buildings, 2 private houses, an administrative building, as well as cultural institutions, stores, and shopping centers were damaged. And in the Sumy region, as a result of Russian airstrikes, 2 people were killed and 3 were injured. This was reported by local authorities. An administrative building, a warehouse, a gas pipeline, and a transformer were damaged. At noon, the Russians deliberately attacked a passenger bus in Kherson with a drone. As a result of the strike, 20 civilians were injured. 4 of the victims are in serious condition, according to doctors. The bus was completely destroyed. Russian occupiers also attacked an evacuation vehicle in the Zaporizhzhia region with FPV drones. There were 3 rescuers and an elderly couple inside the vehicle. The drones exploded near the car. As a result of the strike, it could no longer continue moving. Despite this, no one was injured. The elderly couple was taken to Zaporizhzhia in another service vehicle. Rescuers noted that this incident once again demonstrates the cynicism of the Russians, who strike evacuation vehicles and civilians. Russian occupiers attacked Kharkiv again, hitting a civilian enterprise. 2 men were killed. They were trapped under the rubble of the building. 7 more employees suffered serious injuries and were hospitalized. Firefighters who arrived at the scene extinguished the fire and cleared the debris. All the details are in Natalia Belakudri's report.
8 a.m., an explosion rang out in one of Kharkiv's districts. The strike hit the roof of a food industry enterprise. The employees had just gathered for the shift there. A fire broke out immediately after the attack. Rescuers who arrived at the scene quickly put out the fire and began pulling people out from under the rubble. 2 men died at the scene, as well as employees of the enterprise. Investigators and prosecutors documented the damage after the enemy UAV strike. Preliminary reports indicate that Russian forces used a Jurian-2 drone. The strike by the Russian army claimed the lives of civilians. The enterprise had nothing to do with military facilities.
This is a completely civilian enterprise. It has no connection to military infrastructure whatsoever. There are no military facilities nearby. This is terror against our businesses. The enemy struck this enterprise with a Shahed drone in the morning, just as people arrived at work.
Rescue operations at the strike site are finished. The injured are getting needed help. Natalia Belakudria and Andrei Domovoy from Kharkiv for Freedom TV.
Nearly 1,000 Russian soldiers were eliminated by Ukraine's defense forces over the past day. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion are already nearly 1,276,000 people. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 5 tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, more than 60 artillery systems, and 1 multiple launch rocket system. They also destroyed more than 2,000 drones and over 280 units of Russian special-purpose vehicles. 137 times over the past day, the Russian army tried to break through Ukrainian defenses. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russians were most active in 3 directions: Pokros, Kostiantinovka, and Hulyakov. In each of these areas, the defense forces repelled about 20 assaults. Another 10 times, the occupying forces tried to advance in the Slavyansk sector of the front and 4 times in the Lyman sector. They struck at the radar eyes of Russian air defense missile systems in occupied Crimea, a warehouse in the Zaporizhzhia region, an arsenal in Donbass. Special Operations Forces published a video showing the successful strike on important enemy targets. The military emphasized that medium-range strikes are being carried out deep into Russian territory, up to several hundred kilometers. And this is made possible by members of the resistance movement in the occupied territories of Ukraine. In
the Syrskyi area of Donetsk region, a stockpile of rocket and artillery weapons was destroyed, with ongoing detonation of ammunition. In Sevastopol, an RLC-64N6E radar and its antenna, which served as the eyes for Russian surface-to-air missile systems, were destroyed. S-300 and S-400. A drone warehouse was hit in Novozlatopil, and a logistics warehouse was struck in Maryanovka in the Zaporizhia region. From a statement by the Special Operations Forces on Telegram.
Hungarian citizens who entered the territory of Ukraine do not have delegation status. This is how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine responded to the visit to the country by representatives of the Hungarian government, led by State Secretary of the Ministry of Energy, Gabor Csepek. He announced to the guard at the border checkpoint that he was going to hold talks with Ukrainian officials in Kyiv and find out the status of the oil pipeline. However, Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Georgy Tahi emphasized that there are no official meetings planned, and Hungarian officials cross the border under the general rules for all citizens of Schengen countries, using visa-free entry.
Anyone traveling for tourism purposes can enter Ukraine from Schengen countries in exactly the same way. This group of people does not have any official status or scheduled official meetings on the territory of Ukraine. Therefore, it is definitely incorrect to call them a delegation. Georgy Tahi, spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, in a comment to the media.
Growing budget deficit, problems in the banking sector, and a drop in revenues from energy exports. Western analysts note that the Russian economy is approaching collapse. Sanctions are gradually undermined. They are undermining the country's financial stability, and war expenses are hitting the state budget harder and harder, according to the European Union. How restrictions and the war are changing the economic situation in the Russian Federation. In our next report,
Sanctions alone can't stop the Kremlin's aggression against Ukraine, but 4 years of consistent efforts have significantly affected Russia's economic situation. This was stated by the European Union Sanctions Commissioner, David O'Sullivan. The country's sliding into recession. They have serious problems with public finances, inflation, and very high interest rates. According to the commissioner, state banks have faced a rise in bad loans that were taken out by industry to finance the war economy, and now companies are unable to service them.
Russia is on the brink of financial collapse. Similar to the crisis of 1998, of course, a dictator who's fully determined to continue the war at any cost might do exactly that. But sooner or later, the situation will become unbearable. David O'Sullivan, EU Sanctions Commissioner.
To hide the true scale of the problems, the Russian Federation is underreporting its war spending against Ukraine, according to Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. Russia's actual budget deficit last year was more than $30.50 billion higher than the official figure. Because of the severe deficit, Russia was forced to cut healthcare spending and nearly a quarter of regional budgets in 2026. This is a record figure for the years of the full-scale war against Ukraine. For example, in 2025, only 5 regions planned similar cuts. In total, officials will save about 107 billion rubles in the medical sector. That's about the same amount Russia planned to spend on the development and production of drones over 3 years. Doctors say that even in regions without noticeable cuts to healthcare spending, there is a shortage of budget funds.
In the districts, of course, everything is falling apart. There hasn't been any renovation in a long time, and the equipment is old. Some facilities, like the psychiatric and neurological dispensary, are in such a deplorable state that they scare both students and patients. The clinic buys reagents and everything needed for tests in large quantities, but there are so many patients that the supplies just aren't enough. Moria, a general practitioner at one of the clinics in Voronezh.
One of the reasons for the large government budget deficit is the sharp decline in the Russian Federation's income from energy exports. Moscow is forced to sell oil, its main export commodity, on the world market at a steep discount because of Western sanctions and U.S. pressure on major buyers. Even though oil prices have risen since the start of the U.S.-Israeli operation in Iran, which is helping Russia improve its position, analysts note that this is still not enough to stabilize the situation.
There are already official statistics showing that revenues from Russia's main oil and gas sector fell by 50% last year. In other words, this is something that can no longer even be hidden. Even things that can no longer be hidden. Now, there are individual voices among Russian officials or even economists living in Russia who have always held pro-government, pro-Kremlin positions. Even they can no longer turn a blind eye to all of this. They can't close their eyes to it anymore because they see that Russia, the Russian economy, is confidently and rapidly running straight toward the abyss.
Russian oil isn't being bought because of fears of possible reputational damage. For example, the largest state-owned bank in India refused to process payments for Russian raw materials despite the easing of restrictions by U.S. President Donald Trump, because it's unclear how long the temporary permit for imports will last. The bank is also concerned that this could expose it to risks on global markets. The Trump administration granted India a temporary permit to purchase Russian oil due to the crisis caused by the halt in exports from the Persian Gulf countries.
The request for help in the Middle East that the United States made to Ukraine shows that Kyiv really does have some leverage. President Volodymyr Zelensky said this in an interview with Irish blogger Colin Robertson. The head of state emphasized that Ukraine now has a high level of weapons production, since it has been developing it from the very beginning of the war unleashed by Russia.
I think we had him. It's like being a good player. You can have good cards in your hand, but it's important not to show everyone that you have them. I think a year ago we also had cards in our hand, but we didn't show them. And now everyone already understands that we have them. Yeah, that's true.
A turning point is approaching in the negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine, said Steve Witkoff, the special representative of the U.S. president. He confirmed that the trilateral talks will be postponed. But the American side says they have a positive outlook regarding this meeting.
We see signs that both sides are tired and worn out, and hopefully this is the beginning of a turning point. It was the same in the Middle East. There was also a turning point there, when Jared and I just felt that they were tired of war. And let's hope that we're at that point now, or will be soon. Steve Witkoff, special representative of the U.S. president, in an interview with CNBC.